I love living within the Cassowary Coast region as there are so many opportunities and hidden places to explore. You have the freedom and possibility to find waterfalls and discover something new every day living here. I'm Maddie England and I'm a Customer Experience Officer for the Cassowary Coast Regional Council. I've worked at Cassowary Coast Regional Council for almost 2 years now, and I started with a business admin traineeship when I was 17 years old. Before working at Cassowary Coast Regional Council, I had a part-time job at Woolworths Mission Beach in the deli, and I also worked part-time at a real estate agent in Mission Beach as well. And then I recently graduated grade 12 the year before starting at council, and applied for a traineeship just after finishing. My role at council is to be the first point of contact when a customer phones up and responding to their needs or any questions they may have, or when they come into the front counter at one of our offices. Before I started working with council, I used to think that there were a lot of local government meetings and discussions that took place, but since working here I realised that it's quite a larger organisation with a lot of internal staff that work really hard to provide each customer with an outcome. When I'm not working, I really enjoy taking my dog for long walks along the beach, and it's a really relaxing and enjoyable thing to do of an afternoon and a morning before I come to work. Socialising and staying healthy is a really big part of my life. On the weekends I enjoy climbing up Victon Hill in Bingle Bay, as well as walking along the Kennedy walking track in South Mission Beach. The view along this track is something that's so unique. You've got the rainforest on one side and the ocean and a view of Dunk Island and all the family islands on the other. You walk along the sand, you walk along the track itself, and you get to see wildlife and all sorts of views that you wouldn't normally see anywhere else except in Mission Beach.
Fellow councillors, staff and residents viewing via live stream, good morning all and welcome. I acknowledge the traditional owners, past, present and emerging. We now hand over to Pastor Nathan Seedon to do the opening prayer. Nathan is from the Breakthrough Generation Church.
Yes, thank you, Honourable Mayor and councillors, council staff members. It's good. We just thank you for the privilege on behalf of the Innisfail Council of Clergy to open a prayer. I was asked to not only just pray but share a short reading from the Word of God. As an Indigenous man, I'd like to also acknowledge the traditional owners, the Mamu people, on which we and the land on which we meet today. But I'll just share a quick reading and then pray, and then I will respectfully exit the meeting. Well, my reading today is from Proverbs 22 verse 1. And it says, "There a good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, and favour is better than silver and gold." This verse is a precise challenge to the intent of our hearts. It was a verse that was written by one of the wisest men that walked this earth. His name was King Solomon. King Solomon was a man who prayed to God and asked God for wisdom to lead and govern his people, that they may flourish. And it is recorded in the chronicles of the nation of Israel as well that through Solomon's reign, Israel experienced the most time of flourish, abundance. But Solomon's wisdom in writing this almost failed him his own self. Solomon, yes, was wise to govern his people, but Solomon failed to be wise to govern his own heart. Solomon fell into sin. He had hundreds of wives and hundreds of concubines when God told him not to take. It was a sin to have more than one wife, and especially wives from foreign nations. And this is where Solomon fell. And as we know in the Bible, the unrepentant sins will not go unanswered, will always be punished. And Solomon was, his sin was met with God's punishment that fell on the next generation. And it was because of Solomon's sin, the nation of Israel became divided. It was no longer a united kingdom. It became the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah. This was because of Solomon's unrepentant sin. I say this because, once again, the scripture challenges the intent of our heart. In my line of business, as a minister, the scriptures tell me if I cannot govern my own house and my own marriage, what right do I have to govern the church? And so I challenge the intent of all of our hearts as you govern our people and govern locally, is that take wisdom to govern your own hearts wisely. And so my prayer will be that you will receive wisdom to govern your hearts today. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan.
Yeah. Heavenly Father, I just thank you. I look to you, creator of heaven and earth, almighty God. There is only one God but you. You are holy and you alone are worthy. I come to you in the authority of your Son, Jesus Christ. And in that authority, I bring this council to you, Honourable Mayor and his councillors and his staff members, Lord, oh God, and I simply ask that by your Spirit you would pour wisdom upon this team, upon this council, not just to govern our people locally, but particularly that they would govern their own hearts and not allow their own desires to distract them from their roles in making wise decisions, hard decisions in difficult times. I particularly thank you for their lives. I thank you for their leadership, local leadership through the COVID-19 crisis, Lord. I ask you in the mighty name of Jesus to bless them this day. Amen.
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 Thank you, Nathan. Councillors, we move on to the next item, apologies, and I have two listed here, Councillor Baines and David Goodman. Are there any further apologies? If not, we'll move on to material personal interests. Please use this opportunity to make public any material personal interest and or conflict of interest, real or perceived, in respect of the items in the agenda. Councillors should use this opportunity to disclose and or comment on other councillors and or staff interests in accordance with the Act and the regulations. Councillors, does anybody have any conflict to declare? Take that as a no. Thank you. We move on to the confirmation of the minutes. You've all had an opportunity to read the previous minutes. Would somebody move that those minutes are a true and accurate record? Moved by Councillor Pavan, seconded by Councillor Chewy. All in favour? It's carried unanimously. Any business arising from the previous minutes, councillors? Take that as a no. We'll move on to item 3, community and culture, and I call on Ms Hanson to deliver the report. Item 3.1, North Queensland Sports Foundation cessation of management. Oh, Jackie. Sorry, it's Jackie Saffron.
Yes, it is on. Apologies from Kath. She's had a family crisis, so she's not in today. So I'll present her report for her. So as you're probably all aware, we've been members of the North Queensland Sports Foundation for the last term. We were members prior to that up to 2013. And at that time, the service level from that organisation started to decline. As of 2017, it was decided to restart. And so that is what we did. So now The Sports Foundation is basically a foundation that runs three major projects, and that's the North Queensland Games, which is done on a rotational basis in major cities and comes to Cairns every 6 years. It has, at this point in time, it's delivering Move It North Queensland, which is a digital platform open to the public to do digital exercise. So that's come about with, obviously, the onset of COVID and is in place. There is no need for anyone to be a member of that, the foundation to actually get access to that online. So our public are able to access that at any time. And they also run the CQ University High Performance Sports Bursary, which is for elite athletes and coaches commencing their first year at university. Currently, council supports its athletes and its sporting community through the Community Assistance Scheme grants. So through some investigation, what has happened is we've realised that we're not getting a return on investment that we thought we would get with this group. We did do the Sports Star Awards 2 years ago, and they did bring in around about 140 people into the community with an expenditure of about $31,500. It also cost us $39,400 with an income of $28,400. So whilst it was, it did cost us around about $10,000. That was basically all we got from that event. So our athletes were recognised, but that is the last time they've been recognised in a public arena. We have 2 councillors who attend that, the meetings for that committee, on the committee, and that usually costs us around $900 a quarter for them to attend, between accommodation and travel. So the report is basically asking that we step aside from that organisation and then organise our own bursary and support for our local athletes. I don't know if there's any other further questions that you'd like to ask.
Councillor Chewy.
Thank you, Ms Saffron. I just was wondering, could you just explain a little bit more? I have 3 questions about the eligibility of the candidates who could apply for these awards.
For council's awards?
Yeah, the new ones.
Okay, so
that
the
we're about to
eligibility
endorse.
is around, there's a junior sports female, a junior sports female and male, a senior sports female and male, and Indigenous junior and Indigenous senior. So obviously there's age groups there, 8 to 12, 13 to 18, and 8 to 12 and 13 to 18. So basically what would happen is that they have, there's a criteria written into the application, and they would need to, they don't need to necessarily meet every level, but they have to identify certain levels. So there's actually 5 levels, starting with achievements from school competition and events, going through to international competition and events. So basically that's information that we would gain from them and from the person who's nominating them, and then they would, we would then sit down and work that out with a committee.
Okay. Well, my 2 questions are almost. Who can actually nominate the person?
Okay. Anybody could actually nominate the person. However, the expectation, because we're dealing with children, would be around child safety. So the expectation would be that it would either be the parent, the school, or the sporting club, or that they would be working very closely with those organisations and or parents to ensure that we have the child safety issues covered in that space.
And could you also just let us know who will be on the panel that makes the decision to award the awards?
Yep. On the panel, whilst we haven't got individuals nominated yet, we've had the discussion, and we're sort of looking at there would be obviously the mayor, 1 councillor, possibly representatives from the schools, so either the principals or maybe the sports leaders in those schools, and then possibly a sporting representative as well.
Okay, and lastly, I believe the application is going on the website today, is that correct?
The application, once a decision is made, if the decision is made, this is the way you want to go, yes, the application will be put up as quickly as possible, because the idea is that we have a visitor coming, a governor visit happening, and we would like to have it presented at that visit, civic reception.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Ms Saffron? Councillors, I just want to make it very clear that this is a cost-saving measure in the budget process. We're exiting for that reason and that reason alone, I believe. And in terms of reinvestment, the 6 bursaries and the appropriately worded polo shirts that they will receive comes to about $5,000. So in effect, the recommendation today will save $15,000 in the budget, which adds to the $60,000 that we've already cut from catering, and every little bit helps. So would somebody like to move the recommendation, please? Moved by Councillor Toohey, seconded by Councillor Millwood. All in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Ms Saffron.
Thank you.
We now move on to Governance, Environment and Finance, item 4.1, and Ms Bradley will present this report.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Someone obviously has left a snack. So we've got 3 reports today. The first one is our monthly council reporting package that we bring to council each month. So this reporting package is up until the 31st of May 2020 and includes the third quarter budget review that was adopted by council on the 28th of May, and that's the budget that's reflected in the reports that I'll take you through. So, as always, it's a detailed analysis of council's year-to-date revenue and expenditure across all departments and includes various statistical data with highlights on council's financial operations. You will notice that it is a condensed report this month. That's due to a couple of reasons. Firstly, we're trying to refine the reporting that we're putting forward to council, and secondly, because of departmental changes that needed to be implemented in our ledger in order to enable the budget to progress, that we couldn't report in the same format as what we have been in the past. So some of the highlights from this report include an end-of-month cash balance sitting at around $42.7 million, operational revenue at $90.6 million, which is $247,000 over budget year to date in comparison with the $90.3 million full year budget. This represents 97% of our full year budget being received. Operational expenditure sitting at $86.4 million, which is $702,000 over budget year to date in comparison with the $85.7 million year to date budget. So 92% of our full year budget has been consumed. Capital expenditure for the month was $3.2 million, and year to date capital expenditure including commitments totaled $55.9 million. So this is 72% in comparison with our full year budget excluding commitments, and 77% including commitments. So in the report itself, on our first page of the report, we have our financial performance. So the cash operational revenue year to date sitting at $80.8 million, and cash operational expense sitting at $51.9 million, giving us a cash operational result at $28.8 million. The net result before capital sitting at $4.2 million, and the total net result including capital at $14.3 million. The next page is our balance sheet. So at the 31st of May, council's total assets were valued at $1.24 billion, total liabilities at $27.3 million, giving us total community equity at $1.21 billion. The page after that is at council's cash flow. So for the month of May, our net cash outflow from operating activities was $1.34 million. Net cash outflow from investing activities at $3.4, giving us a net decrease in cash held for the month of $3.44 million, leaving us with a cash balance, as mentioned, at $42.7 million. The next page details our net rates and utilities, currently sitting at $65.9 million versus a year-to-date budget of $65.93, so $49,000 variance. Underneath that, we have our levies and rate arrears, which are a quarterly report, so when we bring the June report, we'll have those June figures included. The rest we've already been through. Next page is our detailed revenue on fees and charges, currently sitting at $2.3 million, year-to-date actual versus a year-to-date budget of 2.43, so with 56,000 under budget due to various fees you can see there. Grants and contributions year-to-date sitting at 20.3 million versus a budget of 18.9, so we are 1.38 million ahead of budget here. Mainly to do with our operational grant, which represents our financial assistance grant that's been partially received this year. Capital grants over budget by 507,000, which is to do with unspent grants that will be revised at end of financial year and adjusted accordingly. Capital contributions also over budget by 408,000, which relates to developer contributions at Campbell Street and Mission Beach. Other revenue sources year-to-date sitting at 14.9 million with a budget of 14.68 million, so 239,000 ahead of budget. Mainly to do with the gain on asset disposal, which relates to fleet, and also capitalisations that have happened offset by the disposal of those assets. Other revenues currently 124,000 ahead of budget, which is mainly to do with our family daycare revenue received, which has been offset by additional expenditure. The next page is our employee expenses, including contractors, sitting at year-to-date actual of 24.9 million with a year-to-date budget of 24.5. So we are 414,000 ahead of budget, mainly due to additional contract labour with vacant positions, as well as termination payments as a result of the restructure, which have been partially offset by vacant positions being held in the business. Materials and services, year-to-date actual sitting at 26.9 with a year-to-date budget of 27, so we're 146,000 behind budget. Mainly to do with, there's a few variances here. We've got motor vehicle expenditure over budget due to additional fuel and maintenance costs. Other goods relate to purchase of small plant throughout the year, as well as defibrillators that were purchased. Other services is 340,000 ahead of budget, mainly to do with legal expenses, partially offset by legal recovery costs. The next page details the number of property searches for the month of May. We have seen a decrease of about 38% from the previous month. However, it is in line with May from the previous year, with the total of applications received being 42 in May. Aged debtors for the month of May, we've got 902,000 sitting in the 0 to 30 days, 9,031 to 60 and 145 in the 90 plus days. We will bring a confidential report to the next meeting with the quarterly details of that. Following page is our number of incoming calls, which as you can see, we've seen a reduction also. So the total number of calls coming in May totaled 1,851. So a 13% decrease on last month and a 23% decrease on May last year. After hours, you can see, have also reduced by 44% on last month, with less phone calls being received outside of our business hours. So sustainability, our operating surplus ratio was sitting at 5% at the end of May. Our asset sustainability ratio sitting at 120%, and our net financial liabilities ratio sitting at minus 32%, all within the relative targets mentioned in that table. The next page we look at our requisitions raised. So for the month of May, we were sitting with 30% requisitions raised after invoice, which is something Council is addressing, and excluding plant brings it down to 13% in line with the previous month. So still some room for improvement in that space. Underneath that, we have our payments processed. So in May, a total of 1,443 invoices were processed by the team. It's an 18% decrease in the previous month with the number of invoices received, with 91% paid within terms, which has seen an increase from the previous month. The next page is our capital work in progress. So the month of May, Council had $46.1 million worth of work in progress, increase of $3.5 million on the previous month. This was split across various project status, as you can see in the tables at the bottom of the page, with 30% of that sitting in construction, 39% in physically complete, and 23% in capitalisation ready status. That equates to about $14 million in construction, about $18 million in physically complete, and about $11 million sitting in capitalisation ready. The last table there states the number of projects sitting in each of those categories, with 144 projects in pre-construction, 79 in construction, 78 in physically complete, and 87 projects in capitalisation ready. The last page of this report I'd like to take you through is our capital expenditure year to date. So year to date actual, we're sitting at 44.8 million capital expenditure. We've got commitments as at the 31st of May at 11.1 million, giving us a year to date total of 55.9 million. Our year to date budget is at 62.5 million, so we're 6.6 million under budget at the moment, with a full year budget of 72.368 million. So this represents 77% of the capital budget spent. Did anyone have any questions?
Any questions, councillor, for Ms Bradley? If not, I'll put the recommendation to the vote. Somebody move, please. Moved by councillor Millwood, seconded by councillor Barnes. All in favour? Carried unanimously. We'll move on to item 4.2, the investment risk appetite.
So the report we've brought to council today, the Queensland Audit Office has undertaken our interim audit for the 2019-2020 financial year, which assesses the design and implementation of council's internal controls. No significant internal control deficiencies were identified during the interim audit. However, a number of deficiencies have been identified, with 3 of the 7 either being resolved or anticipated to be resolved when the auditors return for their year-end visit. There's a number of prior year issues that still remain unresolved, but will be reviewed in detail and retested when the auditors are on site, commencing 31st of August. So each year, the interim audit takes place, and the auditors generally come on site. This year with COVID-19 was exceptional circumstances, so they weren't physically on site, and they assess council's internal control framework prior to the final audit that's undertaken after end of financial year. So it focuses on the design and implementation of certain internal controls and whether they're operating effectively across our business. So a review of any prior year issues is also conducted to assess if they can be considered as resolved, as well as a summary of the audit progress and emerging risks across the country. So areas of emerging risks highlighted by QAO in the interim report include financial sustainability in relation to COVID-19, everyday internal controls, also with the change in working arrangements in light of the current circumstances, valuation of property, plant and equipment, impairment of receivables, also financial statement disclosures, and information technology and cybersecurity risks. So management continuously monitor and mitigate these risks by implementing controls to mitigate them and remain vigilant against fraudulent activities across the organisation. All issues that have been identified, together with their recommendations for appropriate action, as well as management's responses, have been included in the attached interim report, and it provides risk rating definitions as well in there. So a summary of these issues is in the report that's in front of you now, with Table 1 containing the current year control issues, Table 2 with the prior year control issues. Financial reporting issues, there's no current financial reporting issues identified. And Table 3 is prior year financial reporting issues. So Council will continue to work towards mitigating the risks identified in those tables and in the report attached, by the agreed timeframes and commentary around those in the report as well. So factors such as COVID-19 can create a degree of uncertainty and additional risks associated with unusual work arrangements that we find ourselves in. So a focus on internal controls and improved procedures will help to mitigate those risks, which we'll endeavour to pursue continuously. Did anyone have any questions?
Any questions, councillors, for Ms Bradley? I have a question. Could you explain in the recommendation why we're actually in breach of the threshold of the current investment policy?
Through the chair, that's the second report that we'll move on to after.
Oh, I've got the wrong one, have I? Okay.
Unless I have. Apologies. Sorry. I took you through item 4.3 first. I had it in the wrong order. My apology.
That's okay.
Would you like me
Do
to
4.2,
do
please.
4.2?
Yep.
Sorry. And then we'll come back to your question.
Yes.
So the investment risk appetite. So decisions are required to ensure that the most effective use of funds are to be determined, and officers attempt to maximise interest income while ensuring the exposure to risk is minimised. So COVID-19 and the general economic outlook in Australia has required council to be innovative in the use of funds in order to maximise earnings for authorised investments. So this has resulted in a requirement to increase our risk appetite and review the investment requirements in the short term. So each year, council adopts an investment policy which sets out the guidelines and boundaries for investment for council, surplus cash balances which meet the requirements of our statutory body's Financial Arrangements Act. So the policy supports council's investment and risk philosophy and provides a sequential process to be followed in undertaking investment activities. So the goal is to maximise earnings from authorised investments of cash holdings after assessing market and liquidity risks. So the investment policy is effective from the 1920 financial year, states the guidelines as those in Table 1, with the minimum total investments and maximum percentage of total investments across those various entities. So market trends are offering all-time lows for interest rates, as you're aware, both on-call and term deposits, and as such, council's return on investment has significantly diminished. So as council's cash reserves diminish, the liquidity risk in the various funds increases. So Table 2 contains the cash investments and credit risks as at the 17th of June. With A-1 plus institutions, 15 million invested with them, totalling 38% of our current balance at that point in time. A-2 institutions, $9 million invested with them, which is 23% of our current our current cash that we have available to invest. This has resulted in being 3% over the threshold in our investment policy. The QTC fund, which is where council's cash is maintained, a bit over 10 million sitting in that institution within our 25% requirement in that fund. So council currently has cash investments totalling 39.3 million tabled in that table that I just took you through, invested at various interest rates from 0.7% to 1.6%. And in order to maximise return on investment, has over-invested in the A-2 as mentioned. This is mainly due to the reduction in rates offered by the Queensland Treasury Corporation and council having to increase investments with other financial institutions. The proportion of investments fluctuates based on the overall amount of available funds, investment maturities and cash flow requirements of the organisations. So in order to monopolise on rates at present, with the view that an increase in interest rates in the near future is quite unlikely, it is recommended that we increase investments investments occur in additional institutions to maximise council return on investments. Table 3 details the investment rates that were obtained by our finance team on the 17th of June 2020. As you're aware, are subject to change depending on the day. Based on those rates provided in that table, it's considered that the AMP 31-day notice account would be the most appropriate investment choice in order for council to maximise interest revenue. This account runs in perpetuity like a cash account with funds available to be accessed within 31 days notice. It normally sits at 0.8% over the cash rate at 1.05%, but is currently providing a 1.3% return. This, however, would result in increased liquidity risk in A-2 investments and result in a further breach of our investment policy. Therefore, it's proposed that the credit risk guidelines in the current investment policy be updated to those tabled in table number 5. So this would see no change in QTC with 100% maximum investments sitting in that space. For our AAA institutions, it would mean an increase from 55% maximum investments to 100%, AA institutions from 45% to 100%, A+ to A institutions from 30% to 75%, triple B+ to triple B from 20% to 50%, and triple B- from 5% to 25%. So this will ensure that staff have greater flexibility in order to manage council funds and invest accordingly to maximise the investments that council has.
Okay, thanks, Ms Bradley. Any questions for Ms Bradley? I think you've answered my question, and why we're in breach of the current policy. Would somebody like to move the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Farinelli, seconded by Councillor Millwood. All in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Move on to item 4.3, and that was the audit report. Do we need any questions from the floor to the officer? Would somebody move that recommendation, please? Councillor Farinelli, seconded by Councillor Barnes. All in favour? It's carried unanimously. We move on to item 4.4, the Cassowary Coast Regional Audit Committee report.
Thank you, councillors.
Thank you. And Mr Singh will present this report.
Good morning, all.
Morning.
Councillors, under the regulations, Council is required under Section 211 of the Local Government Regulation to have a audit committee, and currently we have 2 councillors and 2 independent members on the audit committee, and as part of our legislation requirements, Council is required to bring the audit committee is required to present the minutes and also the matters that were discussed at the audit committee to Council. What we have in front of us today is actually, I have included in the report a fairly high-level summary of what the audit committee does. So obviously, as part of their requirement, they ensure and provide independent assurance and assistance to the CEO. So part of the audit committee's function is to make sure the risk control and the compliance frameworks are in place. They also make sure that Council's external accountability and responsibilities under the Act and any regulations are adhered to thereunder. And also the Audit Committee is also responsible for performance management, internal audit, external audit, compliance and reporting. So what we have in the report is a summary through the minutes of the Audit Committee that is being presented to Council. I have taken that everyone has seen the minutes and happy to take any questions. The recommendation in front of Council is to obviously note the minutes and matters that have been discussed at the Audit Committee.
Any questions for Mr Singh, councillors? Not. I'll move the recommendation. All in favour. Moved by Councillor Farinelli, seconded by Councillor Chewy. All in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Item 4.5. I'd like to move that this matter be deferred, and we'll have a later workshop on the content of this report. Somebody like to second that, please? Moved by Nolan, seconded by Councillor Barnes. All in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Move on to item 4.6, and I'll hand over to the CEO to deliver this report.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Chairman. This is in respect of Council's future meeting dates. Council will recall that under the quadrennial elections 2020 regulation, the Chairman instructed me to close meetings to the public on the basis that they be live streamed through to the end of June. So it's now necessary to review our position as to both the dates and the locations of the meetings. The dates recommended, excuse me, commence 9th of July, and you can see them laid out there through to December. The recommendation also includes that only one meeting be held in December due to the usual council practice of streamlining its process at that time of the year, and the locations, Mr Chairman, are in the hands of the council.
Thank you, Mr. Gott. Any questions for the CEO on that report at future meetings? If not, would somebody like to move, please? I do have one additional item. It's not actually written into the agenda, but it's in relation to our future meetings and COVID-19 management. Councillors and members of the public viewing via live streaming, I form the view that relaxation of travel restrictions as is occurring, and I anticipate will continue, may well place further pressure on Council's ability to protect the public if Council allows personal attendance at Council meetings. Since our decision was made to close our meetings to the public, but rather live stream meetings with absolute transparency, we have seen streaming data which demonstrated that the public viewing the meetings is vastly greater than previous viewing in person. I'm very proud as Mayor that my previous instruction to the CEO to provide for live streaming solution has led to significantly great transparency in the interests of democracy. For the reasons I have mentioned, and because I am satisfied it is not practical for the public to attend our meetings because of health and safety issues associated with the public health emergency involving COVID-19, I hereby instruct the CEO to close all meetings to the public until, at the earliest, the end of December 2020. I do this on the basis that meetings will continue to be conducted in this venue and our existing sanitation procedures, physical distancing in place, and on the basis that the meetings be live streamed. Mr. CEO, please ensure that this decision is duly published on our website in accordance with the Local Government Electoral 2020 Quadrennial Election Regulation 2020. In addition to the above, however, I recognise that councillors and staff from the southern part of our region have been travelling to Innisfail for some months now. In the interest of fairness, I also instruct the CEO to alternate councillor information sessions between Innisfail and Tully on the basis forthwith, and there is no requirement for public participation, live streaming, and is not required, and social distancing can be achieved in Tully with limited staff attendance. Would somebody like to move the CEO's recommendation, please? Moved by Councillor Toohey, seconded by Councillor Millwood. All in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, we move on now to item 5, Asset Sustainability. 5.1, Mission Beach Aquatic Centre. And this report will be delivered by Peter McBride. Mr. McBride. Welcome, Peter.
Morning, Mayor. Morning, councillors. This report refers to the Mission Beach Aquatic Centre, and it's in response to a resolution that was passed on the 28th of May 2020. The report outlines the options for the procurement strategy and timeline to appoint a new management contractor for the operations of the Mission Beach Aquatic Centre. The report also outlines options for developing a revised and sustainable service delivery approach. I'll touch on the, the key points of the report, present the recommendation and then take questions. When I refer to the key points, that being financial background and service modelling, the impact of COVID, procurement plan and timeline. In terms of the finances and background, I just thought it's poignant to note the cost of operations and the change of costs over the last period of time. Albeit the report refers to the Mission Beach Aquatic Centre, when we look at the service modelling, we also take into consideration what's happening with our other aquatic centres. This being the Cardwell Swimming Pool, Tully Swimming Pool, Mission Beach Aquatic Centre, Mission Beach Splash Pad, Innisfail Swimming Pool and the Stinger Nets at Mission Beach, South Mission Beach, Curramine Beach and Eddy Bay. There has been sort of a significant increase in the cost of operations of these facilities over the last 7 years, that being almost 50%. This is largely attributed to the cost of the Mission Beach Aquatic Centre and changes in regulation with the requirements of additional lifeguards to manage these facilities. Council officers have engaged with our facility operators across these different facilities and note that whilst the patronage has remained fairly static and the increase in cost has, increase in cost, noting the increase in cost, the community benefit, if measured by utilisation, has remained static. Council has commenced discussions with the facility operators regarding the need to ensure ongoing service sustainability by thinking differently about the provisions of services. While it is accepted the increase in service costs is unavoidable, a more managed and sustainable approach that looks to limit budget increases by adjusting service provisions is recommended. Some of the options that are being discussed and being considered, and these conversations will continue with the new operator of the Mission Beach Aquatic Centre, will include facility opening hours, which also includes, I guess, how the facility operates and noting periods of low patronage, varying the opening times depending on the season, restricting use of some pools with the broader facility to reduce supervision costs, opening days, possibility of closure during periods of low demand, provision of service as a network, option to keep the facility within the CCR region, i.e. staggered closures. This refers to, I guess, each facility has to go through a maintenance period each year, and it's looking at how that can be staged across the year to not interrupt services across the community. And a strategic review of asset replacement options. Second point comes down to the impact of COVID and the pandemic. As we all know, the impact of COVID has been fairly dramatic, not just with the facilities, but across the broader community. On the 25th of March, the Mission Beach Aquatic Centre, along with other council-owned pools, was closed by the state and federal governments due to the COVID-19 pandemic. At this time, there was no certainty as to how long these restrictions would last. We note the previous contract for the management of the facility ended on the 10th of May. Council chose to defer the procurement process for the management services of the facility until the COVID-19 restrictions showed signs of easing. This deferral was based on uncertainty over the COVID impacts on operations and how long this would last, concerns over the no confidence in the market to competitively bid during these uncertain times, i.e. The demand or appetite in the marketplace to take on a contract of this nature, given the circumstances, and the likely cost of any bids that would have been received as the market sought to price risk. Given the risk of what was happening in that space, it was likely that sort of bidders would be taking the cost of the service into account there, and it was a risk that would be high. On the 8th of May 2020, the state government published its three-stage roadmap for the easing of restrictions. Council officers re-engaged in the procurement process at this stage to commence the procurement process for the management services contract. The tender for the management services of Mission Beach Aquatic Centre was issued on the 6th of June 2020 and will close at 3 p.m. on 8th of July 2020. And the tender is being evaluated and assessed by the following qualitative and quantitative criteria. I'll just touch on these points very quickly, but things we'll be looking at is relevant experience, compliance, accreditation, proposal for management of the centre and services, fees and charges, mobilisation and commencement date, and local content. The report outlines a timeline to go through this process, which essentially notes from when the pool closed on the 25th of March to its earliest reopening, provided the bids are commercial and acceptable and in line with our budget. On this basis, we expect that we will be in a position to reopen the pool potentially at the end of July or early August. Whilst it is understood there is a desire from the community to bring forward the opening of the facility, there are a number of impediments making this impractical. Some of these include, but are not limited to, Council does not currently have an operator, as the contract terminated on the 10th of May. Procurement of these services in a way which complies with Council's procurement policy takes time, as demonstrated in the above program. Due to the short-term and rust nature of the unscheduled opening, a premium commercial rate would be highly likely and the financial burden on the ratepayer would be increased. A COVID safety management plan would need to be developed. The plan may still prove impractical to implement, as a number of people who can actually use the facility may work out to be less than the general numbers nominated by the state. The plan may also require high levels of staffing. Council has budgeted for the opening from early August. Opening the pool would see additional costs to the ratepayer. A further report will be brought to Council in July with a recommendation report following the evaluation of the tender process. This report recommends that we proceed with the procurement strategy and timeline to appoint an operator for the Mission Beach Aquatic Centre and work with all other facility operators and service providers to develop a more financially sustainable service.
Thank you, Mr.
Happy to take questions.
Any questions, councillors, for Mr McBride? Councillor Chewy.
Thank you, Mr McBride. I did have a series of questions, but you
Sure.
have managed to answer them mostly in that report. Just one question. Was it the intention of the council to close the facility for winter prior to COVID changing the world?
The answer is no. There was no discussions to close the facility this winter. However, there was an intent, I guess, to review the operations of how that would look, and those discussions were due to take place as part of the tender process. So it was the idea that we would go through the tender process, review the operations and come out with a sustainable model about how that would look over the winter period.
Thank you. Question 4 you've answered. Just if there's any further update on the shade sale, where we're at with that, thank you.
I can make a comment on this, and from what I understand, there's a proposal to the proposal for this to be funded by the Works for Queensland. If approved, we'd look at, I think the value of that is $120,000, and we'd look at getting those installed prior to summer in 2021.
Thank you.
Councillor Pervin.
Mr McBride, will the successful candidate of the tender be able to choose their hours operation, or does the Cassowary Coast Regional Council have input into that decision?
Yeah, Council's definitely got input into that decision, and we'll work with the successful applicant to, I guess, come up with a model that's, I guess, proves to be the most sustainable and viable for the community.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr McBride, you say that, I would suggest that the public has been more than patient. I think there was a lot of misunderstanding initially. They expected the council to run a pool the same as a leasee. We were copying it a little bit about surf life-saving, etc. See, lessees can do it in a whole different scenario. They're still doing it legally, but seeing they're the leasee, they can have life-saving ability and all the qualifications, where the council, and I think the people do understand now, as we've done a pretty good job explaining it to them. But I know you've just said that the 8th of July is the closing date of our leasee applications. Now, I don't see why we've got to wait till the end of July. I think the public's been more than patient. And as I said earlier, I think they've been educated along with ourselves, and I think we're all ready to move forward now. Sure. We've got a meeting on the 9th of July. Now, if we get 10 lessees, I think it's going to be extremely hard for you to bring something to a meeting on the 9th. But let's say hypothetically you get 1 lessee. You think it'd be too much to ask that you could race through that program and bring something to the meeting and make one of the best facilities that we have in our shire available to the general public, because also on the 10th of July is the day that our Premier is going to lift a lot of COVID restrictions. Now, I'm not saying we know what she's going to do, but I think by the 9th of July we'd have a pretty good idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, just to work through that process, so I guess we can have a report drafted, ready to go, so it could be taken to Council and we just have to put in the recommendation. It could be more complicated if there's a number of tenderers. I suspect there will be more than one. In saying that, we can work with the CEO and governance to potentially do a special meeting, which could be done within a couple of days, perhaps of that evaluation, or 3 days. I think 3 days' notice is required. So we won't necessarily have to wait till the next meeting, I think, which is on the, I don't have it in front of me, but 2 weeks after, the 23rd of July, which would shorten the, which would certainly shorten that timeframe. It also depends on the successful tenderer being able to mobilise to site. We have to do inductions, etc. So we'll be pushing to get the successful applicant into the facility as soon as possible, but there is a process we have to go through.
Any further questions for
No.
Mr McBride?
Just wanted to say thank you for providing all the information. Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess one of the things that's not under Council's control is Queensland Health Guidelines. They're the lead agency. COVID-19 across Australia is experiencing the second wave right at this moment, and I suspect that in the next fortnight we might see the Premier of Queensland change her mind and leave the borders closed, because I think there is a genuine concern there now that Victorian holiday makers want to come up here for the winter period, and even if we can get the tender process rushed and get a decision on the 9th, I fear COVID-19 is going to control the opening of the Mission Beach Aquatic Centre, not 7 councillors. I think that's been realistic. But anyway, thank you, Mr McBride.
Thank you.
Somebody move that report, please. Moved by Councillor Tui, seconded by Councillor Barnes. All in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 5.2, Services Report, and this will be delivered by Mr Sanders. Welcome, Mr Sanders.
Morning, Mr Mayor and councillors. The Delivery Services team has continued to work on projects during May. This is a report based on the progress made during May, slightly increasing the overall program completion to 71%, while working on an additional 11% of projects. Echoing Mr Goodman's comments from the last council meeting, we did experience some significant rainfall during the month of May, with record rainfall recorded in Bingle Bay with a monthly total of 680 mil, receiving in excess of 450 millimetres within a 24-hour period. Innisfail, in comparison, received around 453 mil of rain across 19 rain days, and Tully in excess of 600 mil across 21 wet days. So despite that, on an overall program perspective, we are positioned well with our capital works delivery, largely due to the significant progress we made prior to Christmas. So I think in comparison, we were sitting at around 60-odd% practically complete by Christmas. So just to talk about some of the key achievements for the month of May, there was continuation of the Clifford Road upgrade project, and some of the progress is buried and unseen, essentially, as far as the 87 metres of 1,350 pipe culverts laid, installation of 104 metres of 900 pipe culverts, and some significant excavation and placement of pavement-based material. There was the commencements of the Wongaling Beach Library refurbishment, and in attachment 2 you'll be able to see the photos from some of the progress and some of the challenges that we've had during the month of May. So the priorities for the month of June was the continuation of Clifford Road upgrade project, completion of the 5 Ways Roundabout Urban Drainage Renewal project, completion of the Transport and Main Roads External Works, which is our culvert renewal program for them that we're undertaking on Alarish Mission Beach Road and Tully Hull Road. Downing Street, we've commenced the Sealing of Urban Streets project there. We've progressed with a minor project at the Tully High School, which includes expanding the turnaround area there and a bit of sealing work, and commencements of our Meena Creek major culvert project. How that looks financially, as of the 1st of June, we were sitting at around 81% complete, including commitments. That was an improvement of 11% for the month, despite the small improvement, I guess, in practical completion of projects. So what we're forecasting is that 19 projects are predicted to reach practical completion by the end of June, which equates to an overall practical completion of 113 projects, or 86 by project for the financial year. So the recommendation is that Council receives the report and acknowledges the status of the capital works projects managed by the Delivery Services Department.
Thank you, Mr Sanders. Councillors, any questions? Councillor Millwood.
Through the chair, Mr Sanders, I just wanted to know on the roundabout at Tully, do you have an idea of when the finish date will be? I know they're doing the waterworks first and then they're going to fix up the roundabout, but do you have a time frame for that?
So as far as the urban drainage project, it is complete. We do have some minor surface patching there to probably undertake prior, but we do have, if adopted, to carry over from this year is the actual pavement rehabilitation work. So that whole roundabout will be getting a new surface. The intent was to commence that early, essentially in July, and then follow on from the works that are being undertaken at the moment. Sorry.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
Through you, Mr Chair. Mr Sanders, the Clump Point Jetty, how's it going along for completion?
Just through the chair. I might refer to Mr Fisher, who might have a little bit more information on that progress on that project.
Yeah, sure. The latest advice from TMR is that the project should be finished in late August, potentially going on into September. They've had a few delays in terms of the piling, and also some of the weather held them up with their concrete pours, but fine weather now, and not anticipating too many more delays. The contractor doing the car parks due to re-establish on site in July and commence their work.
Councillor Millwood.
Through the chair, Justin, is there potential for that marina to be extended later on in life?
That's a very big question. Certainly one that would need a lot of consideration and discussion with the state.
Any further questions, councillors? If not, would somebody like to move the recommendation, please? Moved by Councillor Farinelli, seconded by Councillor Pervin. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 5.3, NDRRA NRFA monthly report. Mr Sanders.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This report is another monthly progress report to outline the progress made in our restoration program under the Natural Disaster Relief and Recovery Arrangements, and now called Disaster Recovery Funding Arrangements, which are jointly funded federally and state. So just to run through some of the figures there, with the progress to date, we've received around $25 million worth of funding across these two events. 2018 projects are at around $6.7 million worth of expenditure, or 97% complete at the end of May. And our 2019 approved value is 18.5 million, with us sitting already at 25%. So that work has received an extension of time through to December 21. Originally, the deadline there is for June. So just touching on our expenditure, as you can see to date, 6.3 million. 2019 we're at 5.1. This is demonstrated in the attachment there. There's a couple of graphs there that will show our cumulative expenditure and revenue and how that's tracking and when we can claim for our next amount. Followed up by Appendix A, which is the photos and some of the progress that we've made in some of those locations. I think it is important to note that despite the extension of time that we have received to complete the 2018 works, which was originally due by June 30, we have received an extension until July, the end of July. However, we are looking like we're going to be finished by the 30th of June on that remaining 3% that we reported on in May, and obviously confirming that extension of time. One thing that we have received, which is probably, it's not in this report, has come in since, is the confirmation of 5 betterment projects, which are worth approximately $1.5 million, which we've received funding for as well in the recent weeks. So that is a substantial pickup for council, and we'll look at some of our hotspots on a few projects there to increase resilience. What we also have progressed with, and we are closing, the tenders do close on the 6th of July for the remaining $5.8 million worth of work under the 2019 program. So it is our anticipation to try and deliver that prior to this December. However, it's not due until December 21. So the recommendation is that Council acknowledges the results and achievements to date and the future projects contained within the report.
Any questions for Mr Sanders, councillors? If not, would somebody move the recommendation? Councillor Millwood, seconded by Councillor Chewy. All in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Now move on to item 5.4, Work for Queensland, quarterly report, and Ms Perini will deliver this report. Morning.
Morning. Good morning, councillors. So this report is provided for an update to Council on the progress of the Works for Queensland 2019 to 21 program. Council is currently halfway through the funding program duration, and progress is on track for the completion of all works within the required timeframe. The closure of council facilities due to effects of COVID-19 allowed for works to progress earlier than expected, in some cases, as the expenditure in the attachment will reflect. It is expected that minor variations between projects will be required as the program is completed and there is clearer indication of expected expenditure. So just an overview of the attached breakdown there. The council has 22 projects in the program. There are 7 complete projects, 12 projects progressing, 2 projects yet to commence, and 1 project to be reallocated on approval from the state. Total expenditure at the end of May was $1.4 million from a budget of $3.63 million. I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Ms Perini, councillors? If there's no questions, I'll ask somebody to move the recommendation, please. Moved by Councillor Farinelli, seconded by Councillor Chewy. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Mr CEO, the late report, does that get dealt with now or in the confidential section?
Through you, Mr Chairman, that's confidential. There's some items which are entirely commercial in confidence, so if we could put that through to the end of the proceedings where we can take a resolution for council to go into camera and then come back outside of the closed session, please.
Okay, councillors, we've completed what's listed on our agenda. We're now into general business. Are there any items of general? Councillor Chewy.
Just through you, Mr Chair. Yesterday I was invited to Ninny Rise at Bingle Bay to attend a meeting with the Honourable Mark Bailey, who's the Minister for Roads. As we're all aware, we've had quite a lot of, 4 cassowary deaths on our roads recently, and so the Minister just came to discuss what we could do with the roads to make them safer. I thought it was a great meeting. Mr Horton and Ms Newman attended as well from Council. It was quite a mixed group that were there, all socially distanced, obviously. It was really low key, but quite positive. Less signage popped up, but better signage. The signs aren't being maintained. Things like, I found that sometimes with those signs that travellers will pull over to take photos of the car that's bigger than the cassowary. So Ms Galley suggested moving over a sign, but somewhere that people can park. And the Minister suggested even an Instagram sign, just to make it that part of the slowing down of the traffic process. Pink asphalt on the road is also used as it creates a go slow mentality, different line markings. It was quite positive and nothing to, I think that would impact too greatly on lifestyle, but still slow down traffic without even people being aware that they're slowing down, if that makes sense. I think, yes, it was a very positive meeting, like I said, and I think there should be some great outcomes from that meeting. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chewy. Any further general business? Councillor Barnes.
Yes, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to carry on with one of your suggestions earlier in the meeting about live streaming. I just know the general public would be 100% behind you, because some of the older meetings we don't have 2 or 3 visitors. Now everywhere I go there's people watching council meetings that have never ever watched one before or been to a council meeting, and it's causing a lot of local involvement. Like if you have a look at the statistics, we're getting up to 700 to 800 people watching some of our meetings. So I think I'd just like to support you on your comments earlier.
Thank you, Councillor Barnes, and I think public recognition needs to go to our IT staff as well. The professionalism and the way it's been presented. Other councils have contacted the CEO seeking information about the way our IT is structured, the live streaming, and it's gone down extremely well in our region and further away as well. So, yeah, thank you for those comments, Councillor Barnes. Any further general business items? If not, I would ask that somebody we move into confidential. Councillor Farinelli moves, seconded by Councillor Chewy. All in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, we go into item 7.1, the bitumen seal program, and I move that that matter be deferred so further talks can take place with the contractor. Somebody second that? Councillor Farinelli. All in favour? It's carried unanimously. And we now move on to Technology 1 proposal, Mr Wilson's report. We've just heard the background to it. We've had an extensive workshop on this matter. Somebody like to move the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Farinelli, seconded by Councillor Millwood. All in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. And that concludes today's meeting. Thank you, everybody.